Tournament is the weekend after this one coming up, so June 5th to 7th. Catch and release tournament has over $3,000 in prizes with a bunch of categories to participate in: kids, motorboats, shore-based, fly fishing, other categories. We have a huge list of sponsors for this event that make it possible. So check out our registration page, which I put in the chat, whether you're going to register to sign up or you just want to see who's making this possible. Really great local community. We also rely a lot on our volunteers to make this happen. We have people tabling the registrations and handling prizes. So if you're not going to be fishing or you have family members that aren't going to be fishing, consider signing up to volunteer. I also put the volunteer link in our chat. So it'd be great if you want to participate in this event. While you're on that site, signing up to volunteer or sign up for the tournament, check out some of our other upcoming events. We have our walking club. We have our some paddling excursions coming up. We are doing citizen science water quality sampling coming up. And of course, our big premier event, the Great River Race. Um, all right, we got a lot of people on, so we're going to move on to our talk now. I'm really happy and thankful to be introducing Ben Gahagen. He's the leader of the Mass Division Marine Fisheries Recreational Fisheries program. I've known Ben for many years when he was working with river herring and other species. He's always been a wealth of scientific knowledge and really a true outdoorsman. Kind of gets the big picture of all of this. And Ben's going to be talking tonight about the state of striped bass population and why proper catch and release is so important for long-term health. And this includes some of the latest science and status of the species, post-release mortality, and what all of us anglers can do to benefit the striped bass populations. And I'm really looking forward to this. So I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So with that, Ben, I will hand it over to you. And as far as, sorry, one more thing. In terms of questions, we do have a chat open if you want to put any questions as you're thinking of them in the chat. Otherwise, hold them till the end and we can open it up. I can turn people's mics on and you can ask Ben some questions at the end. So you can take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, no, it's been awesome. This is my second year doing this, and it's been great to be able to come in here and do this with the North and South River Watershed Association. It's cool for me professionally to continue my partnership with you guys and keep working with you, Alex, and hopefully bring a little bit to the table for a great organization. So I am gonna do the risky thing here. I'm gonna ask for a little bit of audience participation. Hopefully everybody has used Zoom a little bit and there's that react. If you look down along the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a react toggle with a little heart on it. And if you click on that, you're going to see a raise hand. So can everybody who is registered for the tournament and is going to be fishing, I love claps too, Tom. Thank you. I love the affirmation. If you are registered for the tournament and you're going to be fishing the tournament, can you raise your hand for a few seconds so I can see how many people are here and are going to be in the tournament? Got one. Mike is fishing in the tournament. Got a thumbs up. I'll take a thumbs up as also fishing. All right, we got a couple of anglers here. All right, well, cool. I'm glad that we got some tournament anglers here, and then I'm guessing everybody here else is kind of interested to learn more about striped bass in general. And hopefully this presentation will do a little bit of both. I think it's great that this tournament happens. It's a great way to raise money. It's a great way to interact with the resource. Getting people out on the water and fishing is just so central to everything out natural resources related and why people care about this stuff. So I know that striped bass, there's a lot of concern about striped bass right now, but it doesn't mean we can't be going out and enjoying the resource still. And hopefully you'll learn more about where striped bass are and where they're going and how you can help out through the talk. And so I'll stop yammering and making you look at this title slide. Oh man, I haven't even shared my thing yet, have I? Alex, you gotta help me out here, dude. All right, let's go. Alex, let me know when my screen is visible to everybody, please.
There we go. Yep.
Awesome. Great. All right, so here we go. Um, just a brief background on striped bass and early life history. They are a diadromous fish. Specifically, a diadromous is the umbrella term for both anadromous fish, which are striped bass are. Those are fish that spend most of their life in salt water but reproduce in fresh water, just like river herring, shad, rainbow smelt, all the salmon species. And then there's the catadromous species. And the only one we have of those on the east coast of North America is the American eel, which I think, a lot of you probably know about as well. So together they make up diadromous fish, but like many anadromous species, striped bass are spring spawners. We can't really say what it was like in the past. We know they were found in a lot more estuaries. Currently, you can find them in a lot of estuaries, but they're spawning only in our largest rivers and estuaries now. And that has a lot to do with their biology and early life history and salt tolerance of eggs and larvae. Once they are hatched out in these large estuaries, and you can see I have here the Kennebec River, the Hudson River, the Delaware River, Chesapeake Bay and its various tributaries highlighted, as well as North Carolina. That's where we have documented striped bass spawning right now. These young are born in the spring and they grow quite rapidly. By the end of their first year of life, they could be 9 or 10 inches long. Um, so it's pretty cool how fast they can grow. And then on the bottom here, I have a couple of science words which I can try and explain. But so partial migration and contingent structure, we'll try and learn a few things today. Partial migration is when parts of your population migrate, but other parts don't. And so one way to think about that is like if you're living right now in the town you grew up in, we probably have friends from high school who moved away, or maybe you're one of the people who moved away and then you go back sometimes and you're part of that town's population again, but you're coming and going. And there's some people that never leave, there's some people that do leave. So that's happening in fish and a lot of other animals like birds. And then contingent structure is that structure within each population of some fish coming and going and what age they do that or what size they do that. So that's called contingent structure. And that's kind of how we frame these migration patterns that we see in many fish, including striped bass. So when it comes to striped bass in Massachusetts and fisheries management, we have a really long history with striped bass here in Massachusetts. They were one of the most important fish since colonial settlement here. Um, some of the earliest laws on the books when comes to fish were about Atlantic cod and striped bass and how you could or could not use them because they were recognized right from the get-go as a really important resource in Massachusetts. That over the decades has evolved into what is now a very substantial and important sport fishery in the state, along with a small but also important commercial fishery. Um, you can see here, this picture is from Cape Cod in the 1970s, and this was a time when there was a lot more, like I would say like rec commercial, like these were not like straight commercial anglers, but you could commercially fish for striped bass with a lot more leeway, and a lot of people were doing it and catching a lot of very big fish. Um, Unfortunately, during that time, there was also really poor recruitment. And recruitment means that there were very, very few uh, that young of the year fish that were being born that were surviving and recruiting into the adult population. So we had very low juvenile survival of fish. So we were taking a lot of really big fish and we weren't getting replacements from young fish. Um, we have recovered, we'll get into some of those population dynamics as we move on, but we've recovered the species and to fairly high levels. And now right now we have very high levels of mature fish and they support this very important recreational fishery, which can be worth up to like $500 million a year in Massachusetts alone when you factor in all the other parts of the blue economy around it, like gas stations, tackle stores, hotel visits, all of that kind of stuff, boat sales. So it's a really big part of Massachusetts coastal economy. Um, so when we talk about stock size, which is SSB means spawning size spawning size biomass, spawning stock biomass, and the number of young recruitment. That's what this figure is showing. Anytime you see a management presentation about striped bass, you'll see this figure. So I'm going to spend a minute here to talk about it. Um, And Alex, can you see my cursor on the screen right now?
Yep, we can see that.
Great. So this figure is like the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which manages striped bass. It's an interstate compact that Massachusetts is a part of. They manage striped bass, and this is the figure you're always going to see. So we on the left axis here, vertical axis, we have female spawning stock biomass in millions of pounds, and that is the solid blue fill in the background. All right, and then we have a threshold, the solid light blue line, spawning stock biomass, and then a target. And the idea is to keep the spawning stock biomass above this threshold number and hopefully above the target number. Now, the interesting part about this is that our threshold is really defined around the spawning stock biomass we think we had in 1995. So that's right here. And so, or sorry, 1994, they set the threshold, and then they said that the target was going to be 125% of the threshold. Um, this was partially set because everybody thought that the stock was recovered from this crash that I was talking about, where we had overfishing and low recruitment in the 70s that led to very low spawning stock biomass entering the 80s. There was a moratorium. There was very restricted fishing for striped bass. We recovered it through the late 80s and early 90s till we got to this point. We had a lot of spawning stock biomass. We were also seeing very high levels of recruitment. Um, and this is here on the right-hand side, in millions of age one fish. You can see all these bars for each year. And that's been variable over that time period, but you can see that in the 90s it started to climb, and then we had some really kind of between 2004 and 1994, we had a stretch of very high recruitment, which was great. And then it takes 6 to 8 years for a striped bass to sexually mature. So you kind of see this time lag as you build up here. Then 6 to 8 years later, you're seeing this build in spawning stock biomass. You have these couple good years. You have another peak. Starts to go down though because of this trough here. Then you get another peak. You can get the idea. Unfortunately, most recently, we're dealing with this large class in 2015 and a few other good classes, but not a whole lot of success. And we kind of consider it to have been in an era of poor recruitment since 2005, and especially since 2018. This graph is from the last stock assessment and only has through 2023. I'll show you a more updated version later. But I do want to point out, this is 2015. It's really since the last 11 years, we have 2015 and we have 2018 as stronger year classes and not a lot else happening. And that kind of colors what is going on with striped bass right now. So when we talk about the stock, what are we talking about, right? For us, there's two. When we manage striped bass, we manage it as two stocks. The Chesapeake Bay stock, which is those resident fish that don't migrate out of, I talked about contingent structure and partial migration. The Chesapeake Bay stock is those fish that are not migrating out of Chesapeake Bay. By the time a striped bass gets to be 8 to 10 years old and maybe a little older and is around 31 to 34 inches, almost all of those bass end up migrating and joining what's called the ocean stock. And ocean stock fish come out of, after spawning in the spring, come out of these spawning rivers, school up in the Atlantic Ocean, and then migrate northwards. And that's the ocean stock. That's what we get here in Massachusetts. And so when I'm talking about spawning stock biomass, it's those two combined things. But for us, it's really the ocean stock that's very important. And so where do these ocean stock fish that Massachusetts depends on and all the coastal states depend on originate? That's an important question because we're just managing them all as one kind of big striper pie. And to determine that, Mass DMF, I led a study for Mass DMF where for 5 years we got about 1,000 fin clips from striped bass of all different sizes and all around the state, broken into 3 regions, as you can see here, kind of like north of Cape Cod Canal, all of the water surrounding Cape Cod and Nantucket, and then Buzzards Bay and Vineyard Sound as our 3 regions. And we did about 330 fish per region per year, and we had 5,000 total samples, and we're able to determine their genetic origin back to 3 different spawning groups. one of which was in yellow here is the Kennebec and Hudson. And then the Delaware and Chesapeake was the second, and then the third being the North Carolina reporting group. So like genetically, all the fish in the Delaware and Chesapeake look fairly similar. You can't separate them. The Kennebec River was that population was extirpated because of dams. It was rebooted from Hudson River stock. So we can't genetically tell them apart yet. This was only about 20 years ago. And then the Carolina are completely distinct from these other two groups. But what you can see here is on the left is our proportion of sample, is that when you take all 5,000 of those samples and lump them together, just over 20% of our fish that we catch in Massachusetts come from the Kennebec or Hudson River, really the Hudson River. Nearly 80% come from the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, with some small part of that also from the Delaware River. And then a very minuscule fraction, we do get them fish coming all the way from Carolina. That population is quite small right now. So it's not surprising that that is the lowest contributor to our coastal fishery. When you break it up by those three regions I showed you, the pattern's similar. We do see slightly higher proportions in northern Massachusetts and Cape Cod of Kennebec Hudson, slightly lower proportions of Delaware Chesapeake, and that then flipped in southern Massachusetts, where we have nearly 85% of the fish coming from the Chesapeake Bay. But the overall story I'm hoping you're taking away from this is if you're somebody who's tracking striped bass and paying attention to what's happening with striped bass, if you haven't heard this before, hopefully now you see this and it makes sense why everybody says it. When you do hear it, like where goes the Chesapeake, so goes us. So I was showing you the coast-wide recruitment before in those red bars. This is just the catch per haul for the juvenile index from the Chesapeake Bay done by Maryland Department of Natural Resources every year. And it's up, like I said, this is updated, so it's going through 2025. And the point I want you to take from here is that we have that 2018 bar you saw in the previous graph. And since then, we have 7 consecutive years of very low recruitment. And unlike the past graph I showed you that went back to 1982, this is going back all the way into the mid 50s. And we are talking about, historically low recruitment. This is the same type of recruitment we were seeing after we crashed the entire population in the late 70s and early 80s. And that's what we're getting right now. And that's why a lot of people are really, really concerned about striped bass. So back to this version of it, right? Where are we at right now? I've given you some of the background. Right now, we have 3 really good year classes that are making up a bulk of the fishing opportunity that we see in Massachusetts. The 2011 year class, those fish born in 2011, 2015, and 2018. So when you're out on the water, what that looks like, and this is a length at age chart we put together from thousands of samples collected in Massachusetts. So you have age across the bottom of the figure, and then length in inches on the vertical axis. That orange bar is kind of the average size striped bass at age, and the blue dots, you can see all the variation of all the individuals we have of those ages. So you can see that just like people, some grow fast, some grow slow, some get bigger than others ever do. Like there's variation in fish size, but that orange is the average. And when you look at it this year, this is what you should be seeing out on the water. And I think so far from everything I've read on the internet, people I've talked to, my own fishing experience in the last few weeks, this is what we're seeing, right? A lot of people, the chatter has been, wow, my first fish of the year was 35 inches, 38 inches, 45 inches, 42 inches. Like that's the biggest fish I caught last year. And it's the first, the first fish of my year is that big. Usually we see schoolies to start the year off. That is not what we've been seeing the last couple of years. It's definitely not what we're seeing this year. We're seeing these large fish from 45 inches down to 32, 31 inches. And that's reflective of what's going on with the population right now. To expand on that, I'm going to show you what we're seeing and where it's going to be going. So there's that dotted line there, after the last stock assessment, this vertical dashed line, everything out from here is projected, right? Everything you see on the upcoming figures to the left of 2023, 2022 is, what we think happened. Everything else is projected on continued low recruitment, the expectation that we're not going to see an improvement in recruitment in the Chesapeake Bay. And the first thing I want to show you is that regardless of how many fish we have in the water, this is what the age structure of what's in the water looks like. And I think it's like going to be a little bit different than you're going to think it's a little different than what the story I just told, where I'm like, oh, we have all these really big fish. But even when we have all these really big fish like we have right now, you can see that age one is yellow, and as we get darker into the oranges, 2, 3, 4, 6, these are our immature fish. The blues are our mature fish, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, and older than 13. These mature fish, these big fish, these 28 to 50-inch fish, they're only making up at most 10% of the amount of striped bass that we think are out in the wild, regardless of how many striped bass there are. So even though that's what we're catching a lot of, we're not seeing right now a lot of the small fish, but there's still millions and millions and millions more small fish out there. And this is a factor of natural mortality, not fishing mortality, which is what we put on the population. But when you're really small, you get eaten by a bunch of other things, and we're losing millions and millions and millions of these fish as they get bigger. And then once we get to, a size 28-inch keeper size striped bass, about the only thing that striped bass has to worry about is a seal, a mako shark, a great white maybe, and us. Like that's what's going to get a fish that big. They're pretty predator free at that point. So their natural survival is quite high, but that's where fishing survival or mortality comes in with people. And that's about the only thing we as fisheries managers can control. So even though we're talking about all the big striped bass we're catching right now, in reality, what we have is a little way more small striped bass and this thin slice across the top of these bigger striped bass that everybody's excited about catching right now. So that's the proportion of the population by age. This figure shows you in blue that spawning stock biomass pattern that we've already seen a couple times. And these are all in relative amounts. And so I'm not showing you the true amount, but just so you can compare the two different things. The orange is the actual abundance of striped bass, and the blue is the spawning stock biomass. And so the weakest year we have on this record from 1982 projecting to 2032 would be 0, and the best year would be 1. But it preserves the trends and the spikes and everything like that, the peaks and valleys. So again, we see that like in the 90s, and this is really interesting, when we said everything was great in the 90s and we set that spawning stock, and we're just talking with spawning stock biomass, we're talking about big fish, fish really set, 8 and plus, 7 plus, that's what we're talking about. But it's this one weird peak in history where we had quite high spawning stock biomass, but you can see our abundance was also really high. Right? That's not the case. Really, we have this 1 year in 2004 where that also happened. But otherwise, this entire time where we've been saying striped bass fishing is really good, that hasn't been repeated, even though we've gotten that spawning stock biomass quite high during that period. It was not repeated. If you think about 1994, that's right here. Like we were spawning stock biomass over straight up until 2012, 2014, but our abundance really wasn't what it was in 1994. Now, that's important. So like basically right now, today, we're somewhere in here and we have a rising spawning stock biomass, right? We're going to cross over the threshold number. We might even get to the target number. So like, by the way, we decide to manage striped bass by spawning stock biomass, everything looks really rosy, but our abundance levels are at a time in the late to mid 80s, like 86 or so. And that's at a time when if you ask people how striped bass fishing was, they would have said it was not great. And that's what we're starting to see out in the water, right? Is that there's not a lot of small fish. That kind of ubiquitous striped bass opportunity isn't there. If you talk to people up and down the coast, the opportunity to catch striped bass has become much more patchy. Some places have great fishing, other places have really terrible fishing. There aren't all those small fish that kind of made everybody have really good fishing. And sometimes you got into big fish and that was great. Now there's just those pods of big fish and where they go, like the fishing's either really good because you have a lot of big fish or there's not because you don't have the big fish. So when we see this big blue thing, we're like, everything is great. We have this huge pile of striped bass and a lot of big ones. But the reality of it is we don't. We have a lot of big ones compared to like when the past history, we get that really big wedge of 10% of large mature fish, but our overall amount of fish is quite small. So that's where things are and where they're going until we start to see improved recruitment, which as fisheries managers, we do not have a lot of control over. Like I said, like we can control harvest, but we don't have a lot of ability to deal with improvements to recruitment because that's very much environmentally based. So, as anglers, what can you do? And we talk about striped bass fishing mortality. So, one way to view that this big pile of spawning stock biomass is like money in a bank account. Right now, we know we have a growing bank account. It's starting to slow down in its growth, but we got a big pile in the bank account, in our savings account. But we also know it's going to stop growing and start going down in the next, 10 years. That is like just locked and loaded because we already have 7 years consecutively of bad recruitment coming through. So one way to think about that, and like I said, there's really high survival also of these big fish outside of fishing mortality from people, is that we have to spend that bank of savings, that capital as wisely as we can. How do we conserve it for as long as we can to hopefully get a good environmental output and have a big recruitment event or two to help carry the striped bass population forward in the future? When you look at striped bass fishing mortality, in both recreational and commercial fisheries, so the two different sides are coming from. 92% of fish caught are released, and some of those fish die afterwards. Historically, we have thought that number to be 9%, which is low compared to a lot of other fisheries, but it's not super duper low, right? And when you look at this figure here, you can see recreational releases in light blue. We think in the last 5 years at 9% was making up the largest proportion of fishing mortality, 48% of fishing mortality, recreational harvest, 41, and then commercial release and harvest, and then the last 11%. And so takeaways here, recreational fishing accounts for typically 88 to 92% of fishing mortality. As recreational anglers, we are the largest force of fishing mortality on striped bass. And then number two, recreational, like catch and release fishing, has been thought, really for the last decade to be the largest factor in how many fish die from fishing. So we had a lot of interest about whether or not that number was right, and we decided to revisit it over the last 5 years, and a lot of reasons, a lot of good reasons. The last time that 9% estimate came from a study that DMF did in the late 90s with our former director when he was actually holding my job at the time. And he got as a kind of it's the best way they could have done it then, but it was like now we have better ways. But they caught 1,000 very small fish. Average size was 12 inches. They were caught in a weir fisheries in Rhode Island and then put into a stocking truck and brought to a tidal pool with a gate in Salem. And then they were tagged along the way. And then people fished for them all summer long, and we figured out how many of them died when we drained the pond at the end. So you can see all the numbers there. It's one way to do it, but we have better techniques now. And here at DMF, we've gotten very good at doing this. So we decided to re-examine this, given how important recreational release fishing is to the population. And there's kind of a established 3-phase method to doing this now that we pioneered. And in phase 1, we use acoustic telemetry to understand and observe survivors and dead fish. Phase 2, we try and gather a lot of data from the fishery, hopefully kind of get bonus points for using citizen science here to identify the predictors of post-release mortality. And then in phase 3, you can describe all those patterns and try and scale it up to the entire fishery, which in the case of striped bass, that's the North Carolina to Maine. So that's a really big scale that extends beyond Massachusetts. So in phase 1, we got to tag fish, monitor their survival, and then calculate mortality rates from this. We did this up in Salem Sound. We set up a big acoustic telemetry array. So for people who don't know what acoustic telemetry is, we can put sonic tags. So these are tags that you can program them to emit a unique signal for each tag. over a time interval, typically around 90 seconds on average. Tags can have anywhere from half a mile to a full mile of detection radius by a receiver, a hydrophone you put in the water. And these things ping out their tag number, their unique tag number. And then you can also get you can get special ones that can have other data elements. In this case, we use accelerometers. So when that fish pinged and we heard it on a receiver, we would know whether it was actually swimming or just floating or really, really slowly drifting. So we could do that. You can see here in this middle circle, tail beats, and you can see how survivors had consistent high tail beats and mortalities over time. They dropped off and had almost no tail beats. And so that, because we did this in an array and the fish stayed in the array, we were able to observe whether they lived or died. And we set up a big enough array and only fished within it. And we did this as a result of the circle hook regulations that came out in 2018. That's why we launched this research. Over that time, we tagged 349 bass, 4 hooks, monitored their survival, and we were really comparing J hooks to circle hooks. And what we found, surprisingly, given the literature on circle hooks, was that for the way we were fishing with live and dead mackerel, live mackerel or dead mackerel chunks, there was not a difference in the J hooks and the circle hooks. But it also gave us an ability to predict whether fish would survive or not, because we would assign a condition score to each fish that we tagged. And that could be like 1, no impact, 2, minor impact, 3, major impact, and 4 was just a dead fish. And we basically recorded a bunch of information about fight time, handling time, where the hook was the fish bleeding or not, what was their vitality at release, did we have to revive them for a while, and coming up with that condition score. So while we didn't find that circle hooks would give us a real strong conservation benefit the way we were fishing, we did now have the ability to assign fish condition scores and then know their probability of dying or surviving, which was a big step. And we were able to use that to do a citizen science phase. Maybe some of you participated in this, but it was great. We had over 300 anglers participating. We had over 2,000 anglers sign up, but we covered the entire coastal range of striped bass, and we had over 8,000 striped bass angling events that we now had data for. And that was absolutely wonderful. Oh, sorry about that. And we used all that data to train state-of-the-art models with machine learning. So basically like an AI type of learning. It was a random forest and models, and they were great. And we were able to identify these predictors of post-release mortality using all these data, which even better were collected by actual fishery participants. So no longer was it me as a scientist trying to fish like somebody who's a fisherman. It was actual people who were fishing for striped bass and love to fish for striped bass, or were brand new to it. We got like the whole variation across the spectrum. And this is what we learned from that, was that we had some important predictors, most important to mortality rate. So in all these, you can see the mortality rate from 2% to a little over 6% is here on the y-axis. And then you have different, depending on the box, you have different things on the x-axis. So here, length in centimeters, handling time. So length and handling time were really the most important predictors of mortality rate. And then we had different mortality rates for tackle types, with bait having the highest mortality rate. But treble hooks, interestingly, if you had 2 treble hooks, 2 or more, that had an even higher post-release mortality than bait. And then within that bait group, within the bait, different types of bait, mackerel and dead baits had a higher mortality than some of the other categories. And it was also interesting to see what wasn't important, like things like air temperature, water temperature, angler experience, fight time, that are often pointed to by both anglers and scientists alike, at least in our data set, didn't really jump out as being important to mortality rate. So with handling time being the most important predictor, we decided to also train and run models to understand what predicted handling time the most. And what we found out was that part of that length factor also came in, is the bigger the fish was, the longer it took people to handle a fish. So for a small fish, when you're talking, 12 to 15 inches, 23 seconds. Big fish over 40 inches, 82 seconds. Some of that is surely like the excitement of catching a big fish, the high fives, the photos, the hooting and hollering, which is great. It's like everybody wants to celebrate an achievement like that, but it adds up handling time on these fish. Also saw that experience, people who had fished more than 10 years tended to have a lower handling time, probably both because they're used to dealing with fish, handling fish, getting hooks out, and also maybe they're not taking quite as much time because they've caught a lot more fish. Single hooks, where like the number of hooks, whether they were single hooks or treble hooks, increased time. Treble hooks on the whole were higher than single hooks. And then for some reason, fly anglers seem to handle fish longer than other types of anglers, whether they're using lures or bait. Again, less important predictors: air temperature, water temperature, how often you fish, where in the coast you were fishing. These weren't big deals to this. So really, what we were seeing is that length and handling time were super important, and then you had these other factors influencing that. So now we get to the real fun part, describing the patterns. And a lot of these data were out there and available to us.
Hey,
Temperature, we
hey
could get.
Ben.
Yep,
Hey Ben, I'm sorry I'm going to interrupt you for a second because we had a good question and comment just there.
yep.
Just as the question was, explain length a bit more on those graphs that you just had.
Explain length a little bit more.
You mean fish length is what
Yes,
you're
I
talking.
do. Sorry. Yes, I'm talking about the length of the fish. So I'm trying to say is that like a 12-inch fish, basically it takes almost, 3.5 times longer to handle a 40-inch straight bass, a 45-inch straight bass than it does like a 15-inch straight bass. Is that, people, the bigger the fish, the longer the handling time that is. That's probably a combination of like having a bigger, heavier fish and also enjoying that, celebrating that. Does that help, Alex?
Yes, it does. The question said, yep. Just confirming that wasn't time. Length wasn't length of time on
No,
the
yeah, no. So that I was saying
it's
here, yeah,
actually
sorry.
both. In a way, it's both, right? It's
Right. It's this
the
is saying
longer
that
the fish, the longer they're on the they're being handled.
right, exactly. Like a 40-inch plus fish is being handled for over a minute, almost a minute and a half in some cases, 82 seconds on average.
Great,
Um,
thank you.
yep. So this is the fun part, like I said, and thankfully a lot of these data are available through various places, which you can see listed here. I won't go through every one, but that top bubble there, the fishing variables, that required doing a survey of the entire coast. So we set out to do that, and we took a random 5% of all of the anglers in 6 different states: Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Virginia. And together, those 6 states account for over 80% of the striped bass caught coastwide every year. So it was a really exhaustive survey of like where striped bass are caught. And we think that it gave us a really good idea of what's happening coastwide. And we're able to use that, again, feed it into that machine learning model and come up with fishery scale predictions of post-release mortality. The survey itself was really cool and interesting. On the upper right here, you can see how we broke out the regions 1 through 4, moving from north to south, kind of a northern Maine, New Hampshire, and Mass in region 1, New York, Connecticut, and Rhode Island in region 2, New Jersey and Delaware, region 3, and then Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, region 4. And you can see the color coding up there, which is repeated down here on the x-axis of this figure. So you can see by each region, the proportion of total releases dependent upon experience in years, avidity. Interesting that, like they have in New Jersey and Delaware, they get kind of like really both ends of the migration and some fish in summer. And you just have people who are fishing for more days of the year. You have the highest percentage, almost half the people who answered our survey were fishing for 21 plus days a year when you got to that region 3, which was higher than any other area. You can see greater bait use here in the Northeast, in New England in general, regions 1 and 2 than in other places. Um, you can also see that there's differences in bait types, where mackerel are really only available in Massachusetts and Maine. So you don't see any real use out of, or very minimal use of mackerel outside of region 1. Menhaden are more important in 3 in New Jersey, where those migrations, they're fishing a lot on menhaden schools. Striped bass are following the menhaden in their northward and southward migrations. So it was interesting to see these patterns, and they do inform the final mortality rates. So you've heard me talk a long time now to get to the punchline. Um, what we found was that on average, the post-release mortality of striped bass in the coastal fishery is 4.2%. So that's less than half of the presumed 9%. And that's great news, right? That's really good news. We didn't see a lot of variation based on year, season, or what we call mode, whether people are fishing from shore, boat, or for hire. Didn't see a huge variation in state, although Massachusetts had the highest of any state. That's likely due to the mackerel factor. If you remember all the way back to like 6 slides ago, I talked about how mackerel had a higher post-release mortality than any other bait. And you see this variation in length and age, which are kind of really the same thing. You know, fish are getting bigger as they get older, where a very small fish might have 3. That's really where our variation comes from, this 4.2. All of these are within, 1% point up or down of 4.2. But here we have variation from, 3.2 up to 6 or 7% or more in our confidence intervals in the light gray. So what we can say is that before we assume this blanket 9%, we think the overall rate is much lower, but we do think that it's length based now, which is different and is going to have some interesting repercussions as it works its way into the stock assessment framework. And it's also reflective, right, of all the length and handling time stuff I showed you before. So as an angler, I've just hit you with a ton of data. What does it mean to you? What are the take homes for you? Great news, striped bass release mortality, for the patrons of this tournament, people who might be concerned about this tournament, it's lower than we thought, 4.2%. So, if on average, that's how few fish are dying from catch and release fishing. It does increase with fish size. Like I said, right now, a lot of the fish we're catching are big. So this makes our choices as anglers very important. Anything you can do to reduce your handling time is what you should do. We're going to have a really cool post about this coming out on our Instagram and Facebook feeds tomorrow, hopefully. So if you don't follow us, please follow us. But we'll have an interesting, like a good pictorial series of pictures showing you what you can do, along with some tips like the ones you see on this slide. We'll keep on putting content about that out all season. So please give us a follow and check out what we have to say about it. But, you can make some really basic choices. Do anything you can do to reduce that handling time. Right? If you're going to handle a fish and bring it out of the water, best case scenario, keep that fish in the water, unhook it in the water, never take it out. That's the best thing you can do. That's basically no handling time. The fish isn't coming out of the water, which is how we're defining that. If you're going to take it out, have a pair of pliers on you at all times, or like somewhere where they're very much available so you can get that hook out quickly. If you want to take a picture, either have your camera ready or have your buddy completely ready with it. Best case scenario, again, you're unhooking that fish in the water, you lift it out briefly, your friend takes a picture, you put it back in. It's a 10-second process, right? If you have 2 treble hooks on your lure, take one off, put on a flag or put on a single hook. But the best thing to do is to take one off and replace it with a flag or nothing. And then stay away from bait. Use lures if you can. I use bait sometimes too, like everybody does. If you want to catch a big fish, you do get bigger fish on bait for sure. But as much as you can, avoid it. And then basic recommendation: the average release time, handling time in our study was 45 seconds in that survey. And if you can keep it below 45 seconds, that's what we're recommending. It is hard to do. I'll tell you from doing hundreds of fish in that initial phase 1 of the study. When you have a stopwatch and you time yourself straight bass fishing, all the fights are shorter than you think they are, and all the handling times are longer. It's pretty amazing how time works relatively in your brain. And again, swap out your trebles for singles. If we can get people to do those 2 things, then we would have saved over 1 million bass over the last decade. So these are meaningful conservation efforts that you as an angler can make. And we know from our survey that we did coast-wide, 83% of people who answered the survey said that they were willing to make changes to their fishing practices for conservation. So these are easy steps that you can take as an angler to improve striped bass and keep that bank account of big fish that we have right now, which is a blessing, large as long as we can, with our fingers crossed that we get better recruitment and more striped bass coming down the pipeline. This isn't far from the first time we've had low periods of low recruitment, and we just kind of have to weather the storm until it turns around. So I just want to credit, I've sat here and talked for, almost an hour now. I want to credit, it's not all my work. I've been a part of it, but like there's a big team at DMF who's contributed to this. All these people have been super important to the research, and they all should get all their credit. I have to thank all of the many partners, all the citizen scientists, the other states and agencies. This was funded. If you've ever bought a marine recreational fishing permit in Massachusetts, a lot of the funding from this project came from those permit sales. So thank you. If you have a striped bass license plate, some of the money for this study came from that as well. So thank you. If you want to know how you can contribute to stuff like this and conservation of striped bass, these are great ways to do it. I want to thank all our corporate partners who helped out spreading the word or donating tackle and prizes for our citizen science project, and our partners at VIMS and Pelagic Strategies who administered that survey. And with that, I will take any questions, and there's some QR codes if you want to learn more about this work or contribute to striped bass conservation efforts and research. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ben. Really, really fascinating. I'm gonna read you a couple from the chat, and I have one of my own too. We had a question about landing nets as you were talking about the handling times. What's your opinion on
Yep.
landing?
I think a landing net is a great thing. Like everybody loves to lip a striped bass because they don't have teeth, and it's fun and it's cool, and I get that. But it's great to have a landing net. If you're gonna go out and buy our landing net, we advise that you get a rubber coated landing net, because that is going to preserve the fish's slime coating much better than like a nylon one or some other hard abrasive material. So if you can get a rubber coated landing net, do that. I would go, some tips when using landing nets would be to don't get the fish in the net and then bring it right in right away, right? Like I was saying before, like once that fish is in the net, you can lift it up a little bit, right? You don't have to worry about losing the fish a little bit anymore. I'm talking about like 6 inches. The fish is in the net, and now you have that fish secured. You can keep it in the water, still keep it wet, keep its gills in the water so it's breathing, and get that hook out while it's in the net. And you don't have to worry about losing the fish anymore. If you want, if weighing a fish, I hear a lot of complaints about weighing fish or like what's the right way to weigh a fish? Like use a net, right? If you know how much your net weighs, now you have a fish that's supported in the net. You can keep it in the water. You hook your scale up to the net. You lift it up. You get the weight of the net and the fish, and you just have to subtract the net weight. And again, you've reduced your handling time, which if you want to bring the fish into the boat and then you're putting the fish on the scale and it's not supported anymore, and you're probably doing internal damage to the mouth and internal organs to get the weight, and it's taking a long time, you've now not hurt the fish, and you've gotten that weight you want in like 15, 10 seconds, and you don't have any handling time. So it's a great thing. Use it properly, and it's an even better tool.
That's great. Great answer, Ben. Someone else was asking a question about if anybody's using seine nets, if anybody's seining for bass.
Not in Massachusetts. There are other states that have net-based fisheries, but not Massachusetts. It's a strictly hook and line fishery for commercial striped bass.
Great. I'm going to throw in my question here. I know we have a couple. I'll get to your questions. So great news about the 4.2% post release mortality versus the 9% we thought. But your earlier slide had 48% of the total mortality is coming from catch and release. So is that just the sheer volume of catch and release that's happening? And so if we're talking about things we could do, is it just the sheer volume of fish that are getting caught and released, even at only 4.2% mortality, that's contributing to that 48% overall?
So that was based on the 9%, which hopefully I said. I think I said. I wanted to make sure I said that. So that was based on the 9%. So that flips now at 4.2%. Recreational harvest kind of becomes 48. Becomes the larger contributor to everything. and then the catch and release comes down. They almost entirely flip their numbers there. So that's good. That means that, like, while we don't have a lot of room, as I've said consistently, like fisheries mortality is the only thing we can control, and really the best way to control that is by setting regulations about what fish you can keep and can't keep. And it gives us, we basically still have the pedal all the way to the floor on that, but it does give us a tiny bit more wiggle room. Hopefully, like I said, it's because of the age-based or length-based, however you want to view it, difference in mortality. It's going to change what it's going to be the same story, I think, when we're done with the stock assessment. It's just going to be like through different colored lenses a little bit. So I don't want to get like too crazy about predictions until we see how it comes through that. But it should give us a little bit more wiggle room about harvest, although it's hard to think, going anywhere from where we are now, which is one fish in a 3-inch slot. But it might give us more time at that than we thought we had.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. Before I get to reading a couple of these other questions, just want to throw it out to people. If you have a question, you can raise your hand in with the reactions there, and I can unmute you to ask Ben a question. Other people are asking their question in the chat, which is great. But just throwing that out if you have questions. So some other questions we have here. Dorothy asking, why is mortality higher with bait?
It's more likely to cause damage when you're fishing. A lot of the times it will get swallowed, and both by the nature of it being smaller, like a chunk of bait is going to be smaller on a hook, and people will let the fish run for it because they want to make sure run with it because they want to make sure it gets hooked. So it's more likely to get gut hooked, which causes a level of damage to the fish. I showed those like 4 conditions. You're going to see more 2s and 3s with live bait than you will with artificial lures. So that's why. It just tends to cause more internal damage to the fish.
Interesting. We did have a little FYI for you that your YouTube page QR code's working fine, but the other one, the conservation fund one, doesn't seem to be working.
Oh,
So
that's a burn.
But I would
Thank you
say,
for whoever tried it and found out it didn't. I appreciate that, and I will get with my IT because I'm bummed out that my QR code got broken.
and I would imagine that if people are trying to find that, Googling Striped Bass Conservation Fund will get them to the same place that
Yep.
QR code would
I
have.
know you can find it. And if you get the saltwater permit, if you're fishing in Massachusetts and getting the saltwater permit, when you are about to check out and mass fish hunt, there's a button to make that contribution. So you
Okay.
can make the donation there.
Here's a question from Tom about pinching down barbed hooks. Is there been any studies on barbless hooks being a benefit?
There have not been any studies on barbless hooks being a benefit for straight bass. We didn't look at it in our study, but what I am telling everybody is, like, if you are somebody who is an angler, like, a barbed hook is going to come out faster than or unbarbed hook, sorry, a debarbed hook is going to come out faster than a barbed hook. So again, that's one of those things you can do to decrease your handling time. With that unhooking time, it's going to be lower if you have a debarbed hook. So if that's something you want to do to help lower your handling time, all for it. It's something I typically bring up. Thank you for asking the question.
Yeah, great question. I know double treble hook with barbs is impossible.
Yeah. Yep.
Great. That's all the questions we've had. I'm going to give people another a minute or so. Well, if anybody wants to throw any questions out, but thanks so much, Ben. We really, I'll say it. I probably should have said it in the intro, but we're a conservation organization. We're an environmental organization. We spend a lot of time thinking about river herring and the environment and minimizing our impact. And so we always go through a little bit of soul searching and promoting a fishing tournament. And so this type of education and information about how we can reduce our impact is really important to us to sleep well at night while we hold a striper tournament. But it's important to us because we do try to reach an audience that is interested in conservation that we maybe don't always see in our normal pathways. So It's really appreciate you bringing this, and I appreciate everyone who attended. And we'll post it as soon as we can. If you're signed up for the tournament, good luck. If you're not, consider signing up or volunteering. Those links are in the chat, and we'll see you all out on the water. Thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot, Ben.
everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.